Hello, I'm Russell Rowland, the host of The Song of Roland, a podcast about American culture. Today I'm going to list my top 10 movies from 2025. I waited a while to do this because I wanted to make sure I saw all of the movies that were nominated for Best Picture this year, and I finally got to see the final one a few days ago. So I'm going to list my top 10. First, I wanted to just make a statement that's in relationship to the stuff that's been going on in Minneapolis and overall in the political arena. So, this is a little essay I wrote. Over the course of the last 10 years, we've seen countless politicians, many of whom seemed to be fairly reasonable people when they were first elected or appointed, fall in line with the Trump agenda and just start telling bald-faced lies day after day. We all know Trump has no conscience, so it's gotten to the point where it's not even surprising or shocking when everything he says is sketchy. But what about these other people? As a recovering alcoholic, I know a little bit about how a person can lose their equilibrium. I wasn't aware of it while it was happening, but when I got sober and my mind began to clear, I realized that as my drinking got worse, I slowly but steadily lowered my standards to meet my behavior. It's an insidious thing, the way our minds justify our actions. And the way we do that is never very original. We find people who are worse than we are, say to ourselves, at least I'm not as bad as that guy. Or we judge ourselves by our intentions. I think in the back of my mind, I always thought I was a good person and that I would someday get back to behaving in the manner I expected of myself. What I didn't realize was that you just don't make a decision one day and start doing the right thing. Because your mind has become accustomed to certain behaviors. Lying becomes second nature. Blaming others becomes an instant default. It takes time to make adjustments to your brain so that you don't automatically resort to those behaviors that have become the norm. And the other obstacle is how much work it takes to repair the damage you've left behind. Some people have no desire to tackle that part of the problem. For me, that took years of therapy and very hard conversations. When I look at these people that surround Trump, I see people who have tucked their souls away in the same way I did, and it's not hard to imagine their motivation. Look at the power these people have, the attention they get, the money. It's not hard at all to imagine how these people, many of whom have been openly critical of Trump in the past, convince themselves that they can handle just a few years of trotting out in front of cameras and telling a lie, telling another lie, because they are addicted to the benefits. It must be exhilarating to be able to mock the people you hate and get away with it. Or in cases like Kash Patel, to have the entire FBI at your fingertips to do whatever you tell them to do. A lot of these people seem as if they have always been just as immoral as Trump from the get-go. But I look at someone like Marco Rubio, who used to be a pretty decent guy, a moderate who was reasonable and seemed to make an effort to see both sides. He's obviously made this decision to set aside what he used to believe for the sake of a few years in the spotlight. And I don't think any of these people realize the price they are about to pay for selling their souls. When the Nazis lost power, almost none of them ever showed remorse. They had completely lost their moral bearings, and there was no getting back to whatever modicum of decency they might have once had. You saw the same thing with Nixon's people, most of them. Kissinger died without the slightest hint that he'd ever admit to doing anything wrong. To me, this is exactly the reason we need checks and balances that have become so tenuous in the past 10 years. Because the temptation is just too strong once you get a taste of that kind of power. I don't think any of us are immune to it. But I know from my own experience that the price is too heavy to fall into that. In the end, we all have to live with ourselves. And even if some people live for decades without facing the truth, I know from experience that the internal toll this takes. My soul was never worth that price. So thanks for sticking with me through that. So here's my top 10 films. And I'm going to go from 10 to 1. There was just a lot of good films this year. And actually, before I started, I wanted to mention that, I looked at a lot of top 10 lists online before I started this list. And I went and watched a lot of the movies that other people had on their list. And it was kind of irritating to me in a funny way that, like the New Yorker, um, I looked at this list and I'm like, I haven't even heard of most of these movies. And it made me realize, I watched a lot of them, and there's some good movies on their lists, but they're not they wouldn't make my list. And it just seems like some of these people, these critics, are intent on making sure that they let us all know how much smarter they are than we are, or how much they appreciate things that are much more difficult to comprehend in their minds. But for me, a good movie is something that is well made and beautifully done and makes me feel things. And a lot of these movies just didn't fall into that category. But I did get a few good picks from some of those lists as well, including this first one. Number 10 favorite film of the year is Train Dreams, which is based on a novel by Dennis Johnson. A lot of people loved this movie a lot more than I did. There were definitely things I loved about it, or it wouldn't have made my list. So Joel Edgerton plays the main character, and he was really good in this film. He plays a young father who works as a logger. It takes place in the early part of the 20th century. So he has to travel a lot for his job and come home to his wife whenever he can. He loses his wife and daughter in a fire. And it's a beautiful, the cinematography is amazing. It's a beautiful film. The problem I had with it was the voiceover, which is sometimes just fabulous because Dennis Johnson was an amazing writer. But it does just too much of the work for me. It felt like the story would have been a lot more powerful if they had given Edgerton a chance to tell the story through his own actions. It dwelled a lot on the loss, which of course makes sense, but I thought it could have been even better than it was, but still not bad. Obviously made my list. So number 9, The Ballad of Wallace Island. Okay, this is a really adorable, charming film. There's a guy named Tom Basden who is one of the stars, and he also wrote this screenplay. So he plays a musician, and the opening scene, he shows up on this island, this remote island in Wales, and he's greeted by this guy who's just the guy who plays the other main character's name is, the actor is Tim Key, and he is really funny in this movie. He's like one of these guys that's just always talking and trying to cheer everybody up. He's bad puns one after another. So he greets this guy, the Basden character, with his guitar, and it turns out he has hired Tom Basden's character to play a performance on this island. And of course, we eventually find out through their dialogue that it's for an audience of one. So this guy he pays him a ton of money, and he eventually finds out that he's paid him just because he wants to hear him play. But the other part that he doesn't tell him, that he's left out of the contract, is that he also invited his former partner in crime, his partner, musical collaborator, which is his ex-wife. So Carey Mulligan, who's always charming as hell, shows up a couple days later with her current husband, And it just creates this wonderful dynamic of like awkwardness and lots of under your breath comments. There's just so much tension throughout the film, and this goofy Tim Key character is just constantly trying to diffuse everything and you know tell everyone everything's going to be great. It's a wonderful exploration of how musical collaboration can be a really complicated thing. And Mulligan and Basden play all the songs in it, so I always love when the actors are able to do that. And it doesn't go in a predictable direction at all. That's one of the things I loved about this movie. It doesn't have this sappy, happy ending where everything works out. It's much more nuanced than that. Beautiful performances by all three of the main characters. Actually, there's four. The new husband is also good. So yeah, this one was number 9 for me. Number 8 is just a very unique film called Blue Moon. This is a Richard Linklater film. I'm a big fan of Richard Linklater. He often collaborates with Ethan Hawke, and Ethan Hawke stars in this film as well. They made all the Midnight movies together. Hawke also starred in Boyhood, which is one of my favorite Linklater films. So in this film, he plays Lorenz Hart, who is the original songwriting partner for Richard Rodgers, who later became hugely famous with Oscar Hammerstein. But he was already famous. Hart and Rodgers also wrote a lot of wonderful musicals together. So this entire film takes place in one night, in one scene, one setting, except for a very brief introduction. Hawke goes to the opening night of Oklahoma. Their partnership has just recently broken up, so this is Rodgers' first musical with Hammerstein. So Hart goes to the performance. He's completely disgusted, but also realizes that this thing is going to be huge. He knows it's just way sappier than anything they would have ever written together. So he sneaks out a little bit early and goes to this bar where he's obviously a regular. Bobby Cannavale plays the bartender, and he's really good in this film too. So Hawke is just incredible. I mean, he just carries on this monologue throughout the movie where he's basically trying to convince himself that everything's going to be fine. You can tell he's just heartbroken. It slowly comes out why their partnership broke up, mainly because of his drinking. He's waiting for this young woman to show up that he's got a huge crush on. And of course, Margaret Qualley plays this young woman, and she's always great. It's just a fascinating character study, and Hawke just nails it. I mean, he captures the loneliness of this guy, this sort of tragic trajectory that his life has followed since he hasn't been able to get control of his drinking. Rodgers and Hammerstein eventually show up at the bar, and of course that makes it even more poignant and heartbreaking as he slowly tries to congratulate them, but also he keeps cornering Rodgers to try to talk to him about future projects they can work on. It's just an amazing performance by Ethan Hawke. And actually, I just wanted to mention another film that Linklater directed this year that nearly made my list because I can't believe he made these two movies in the same year. It's called Nouvelle Vague. It's a movie about Jean-Luc Godard making his first film. It's made in the style of the French New Wave. The movie, of course, was Breathless, starring Jean Seberg and Jean-Luc Belmondo. And Linklater has all these characters that are like fellow French New Wave directors. It's just a really unique film. It's in black and white. It's filmed in the same style, so it's got a very unique appearance, and the acting is amazing. The guy that plays Godard looks a lot like him. The gal that plays Sebring is a dead ringer. And, sometimes that doesn't go well if they're not great actors. But in this case, all the performances are great. So just a very unique film and such completely different style than Blue Moon. So props to Richard Linklater for making two incredible films this year. Number 7, Marty Supreme. I think the Safdie brothers, their style of filmmaking is just definitely not for everyone. They directed Uncut Gems. This film is just made by one of the Safdie brothers. And their style is very fast-paced. It's frenetic. People talk over each other a lot. I like that kind of movie, and because it feels more realistic to me than like very structured, your turn to talk, my turn to talk dialogue. The dialogue in this film is just like over the top, always moving. And Timothée Chalamet, who has just become such a fascinating actor, is great in this film. He plays this guy who's a table tennis star. And of course, that's pretty unusual too, as far as movies go. But he's just such a con man, and he's always just barely staying one step ahead of all the people that are after him for money. He's so confident in himself, as far as just believing that he's going to be able to talk himself out of every situation, that he's charming, but also completely frustrating as far as the people around him. But he's great in this film. And Gwyneth Paltrow is really good in this movie. I haven't seen her give such a great performance in a long time. This film explores the sort of the dark side of human nature in an interesting way, I thought, because Marty is not a bad guy in most respects, even though he's pretty self-centered. So I loved it. I know a lot of people didn't. Number 6 is the last one I saw just last week. It's a Brazilian film called The Secret Agent. The guy who plays the lead in this, Robson Andrade, is fantastic in this movie. So it takes place in the 70s, and the guy that directed this film does a really nice job of depicting 70s style and the setting. It feels very 70s. It's got that same kind of washed out coloring. Kleber Mendonça Filho is the director. The main storyline is that this character, he's a scientist who was doing a lot of incredible research work, and this rich guy decided to cut his funding. And it's one of the interesting things about this film is that it doesn't really fill in the entire story, so you're not exactly sure what happened between these two guys, but somehow the main character's wife was killed in the process of their the split that they had, business split. So there's a lot of animosity between these two guys, and the main character eventually learns that this other guy has hired some guys to kill him. So it's kind of a suspense movie, but it's really more about relationships, as this guy tries to find a place to sort of recover and rebuild a new life, but he's also kind of in hiding. The ending was not to my taste, really. I wasn't quite sure why the director ended it the way he did. But overall, this film is just beautifully shot, and great performances again. Highly recommend that one. Number 5 is another foreign film called It Was Just an Accident. And this is an Iranian film. The director is Jafar Panahi. This guy has become pretty well known because he was establishing himself as one of the premier filmmakers from Iran when he went a little too far as exploring some political issues, at least as far as the Iranian government was concerned. So they decided to ban him from making films. And he responded to that in a fascinating and pretty courageous way. He ended up making a documentary called This Is Not a Film. And he had to shoot it very surreptitiously. So, they're sneaking around, shooting scenes without any kind of approval or, permits or whatever. That documentary was fantastic. And I'm not sure, but I think he did the same thing with this film. I could be wrong about that. This is not a documentary, but it is based on Panahi's own experience in an Iranian prison. So the main character is a guy who works as a mechanic. One day this guy comes into his shop, and he doesn't help the guy, but he spots him from afar, and he realizes that this guy was one of the guards at the prison where he was held. And he was a particularly sadistic guard, someone that tortured all the prisoners really brutally. So he concocts a plan to kidnap and kill this guy. And he actually carries it out, except when he gets to the point where he's about to kill him, he realizes that he's not absolutely certain that it's the right guy. So what he decides to do is take this guy, he ties him up and puts him in the back of his van, and he starts visiting all the other people that were in prison with him to try to get verification that he's got the right guy. And it turns into sort of a comedy because this collection of people is sort of a ragtag group. One of them is a photographer who's in the middle of taking wedding photographs of a couple that was also, the woman was also one of the prisoners. So these people sort of form a little band traveling around to visit all their fellow prisoners to try to get verification that they have the right guy. And there's a lot of infighting with the group, a lot of arguments about how to handle the situation and whether they should just kill him anyway, even though they're not sure. It's funny, but it's also pretty heart rendering as far as exploring how these people were affected by the treatment that they had in this prison. So this is a great film. I loved it. It was just an accident. Number 4 is Begonia. This film was directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, who also directed Poor Things, which won Best Picture a couple of years ago. And it stars his usual main muse, Emma Stone, as a CEO of this large corporation. And the actual star of this film, in my opinion, is Jesse Plemons, who is just amazing as this guy whose father worked for the same corporation, and he's convinced that they killed him. And so he concocts a plan, again, a kidnapping film. He manages to kidnap the Emma Stone character, and he ties her up in the basement of his home. He's got this sidekick that's his cousin who's kind of not all there. So these two guys, they hold her in this basement and try to get her to admit. Jesse Plemons is convinced that she's an alien. So the fascinating part of this film is that, the further you get into it, the more you start to wonder if maybe he's right. Emma Stone's performance is brilliant too, but Jesse Plemons is just incredible as this guy who's just completely racked with resentment, but also this determination to find an answer to this mystery. The way it ends is completely unpredictable and fascinating. I just thought it was a beautifully shot and wonderful film. Again, not everybody's taste, but I loved it. Number 3, and a lot of people chose this as their number 1 film for the year, but I have a couple others that are my favorites. But number 3 for me was One Battle After Another. And, one of the things I love about this film, Leonardo DiCaprio, it seems like he's developed like a fabulous sense of what films are going to be perfect for him. And I love the fact that he's been playing a lot of characters who are not like the usual confident, cocky guys that he played in the past. I'm thinking of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and also the Killers of the Flower Moon. He plays these guys who are just kind of, sort of insecure, not really sure about their place in the world. The guy that he plays in this film is like that too. He's a revolutionary. His wife disappears at one point early in the film, and he spends the next few years trying to track down his daughter, the young girl that they had together. Sean Penn is unbelievable in this film as this lunatic military guy who's basically in charge of finding the main character, but he's also completely obsessed with the wife. Those two performances, as well as the performance by the daughter and the wife, are absolutely outstanding. But more than anything, this is just a really fascinating look at the underworld of people who are involved in resistance movements, and the way they try to maneuver their way around the world. Really well done. I can and easily see why a lot of people put this as their number one film of the year. I have two others that I like better. Number 2, Hamnet. Jessie Buckley has become my favorite actress of her generation. She's still very young. She starred in an amazing film, the first time I ever saw her, where she plays this young woman who is determined to become a country western star, even though she lives in Scotland. I just loved that film. It's called Wild Rose, and her name is Rose. So that was the first time I ever saw her, and I was like, who is this woman? And she has just proven to be so good in everything she does. She was great in Fargo, just a lot of other films that I've loved her in. So even though I am a huge fan of hers, I went into this film with a little bit of skepticism because I didn't know anything about the storyline. I didn't read the book, but I was pretty sure it was probably going to focus mostly on Shakespeare, and it turns out it really doesn't. It's really more about family, and in fact, Shakespeare's work is, although there's like a lot of allusions to it throughout the film, um, it's really the focus is way more on her. In fact, I thought this was absolutely fascinating. His name was not mentioned in this film until probably an hour and a half into it, when she finally goes to London or to Stratford to see to see one of his plays, and of course it's Hamlet. So I love the fact that the story was way more about the kind of the sacrifices that people make for art. She is a country girl. She doesn't really have any desire to move. So she gives him her blessing to go to London and pursue his career. But she also resents it. She ends up having to take care of the kids and all that stuff that wives do, while he's off doing his thing. So it's a fascinating look at marriage. It's a fascinating look at grief, when there's a tragedy. And then the final scene where she goes to see one of his plays for the very first time, is absolutely stunning. Her performance in that scene, which goes on for quite a while, is just fantastic. I love this movie. Finally, my number 1. And some of you are probably going to think that it's Sinners. It's not. It's called Sentimental Value. This is another film that focuses on family. Stellan Skarsgård, who I have loved ever since I saw him in Breaking the Waves, plays a very successful Swedish director. He's had kind of a bad streak as far as, well, he hasn't made a film for years. So he's kind of living in his old glory days. People are trotting him out for festivals and stuff, but he hasn't been able to get funding for a film for a long time. But he writes a film with his daughter in mind to play the lead. And he goes back home. The mother dies. He goes back home and moves into the home where they grew up and tries to convince his daughter to play the lead in this film, his new film. But she doesn't want to have anything to do with him. She and her sister have managed to get by without him. They've had very little contact with him while he's off, becoming famous. So she's got a lot of resentment, but she's also become an incredibly talented stage actress. She also has some serious mental issues. So the relationship between those two is the main focus of the film, and it's just so well acted and so well written. There's also another sister who has kind of been the one who's grounded the other sister through the years. She's got her own little family. The acting, that woman is also incredible in this film. So the one who plays the actress character, her name is Renata Reinsve, and she's been nominated for Best Actress Oscar. I think she won for the Golden Globe. And then Inga Ibsdotter Lilius plays her sister, and she's also fantastic in it. But the main thing that makes this film work is just the fabulous chemistry between Nora, the daughter, and the director, the father. It's beautifully shot, beautifully filmed, beautifully acted. So those are my top 10. That's number one. So as far as the films that are nominated, they nominate 10 now for every year. And I wanted to talk about the 3 that didn't make my list, just because, I thought it might be interesting to hear my. So one of the ones that I left off was Frankenstein, which I liked. I thought Jacob Elordi was amazing as the monster. I always like the guy that played Dr. Frankenstein too, and I'm suddenly drawing a blank on his name. But to me, the film just didn't explore the private life of the doctor as much as I would have liked. There was a lot of behavior, especially when he disowns the monster, that just didn't make any sense to me. I didn't understand what was the motivation for that. So it left a lot more questions for me than answers. Their relationship was so strong to begin with, and then it just deteriorated for reasons that were never explained and too mysterious for my taste. Beautifully shot, though. I mean, the cinematography in that film was incredible. The next one, F1, the Brad Pitt Formula One movie, which I liked, but I was very surprised to see it find its way to the Oscar nomination. This is kind of a stupid pun, but it's a real formula movie. Sports movies tend to follow formulas often, and this one is no exception. So I wasn't that blown away by it. I thought it was good, but I didn't think it deserved to be an Oscar nominee. Finally, Sinners, and I was shocked to see that this film broke the record for the most nominations ever for a movie. I mean, I wasn't shocked in a way that I didn't think it deserved it. I think the way this film is set up, the way they capture the time period, the clothes, the music, the colors, I mean, it's just one of the most visually stunning films I've seen in a while. So I love that part of it. I love the first half of this movie, the way that sets up this relationship of these two brothers returning to their hometown to open this club. Michael Jordan was incredible as both brothers. And then when it just kind of suddenly turned into a vampire movie, they completely lost me. I mean, I didn't get that. Not only did I not get it, but it completely ruined all the fantastic human dynamics that they had set up in the first half of the film. I mean, that all just went by the wayside. I mean, there was no focus on that anymore. And it turned into, another like horror, blood and gore kind of thing. And so, yeah, I left that film just feeling like, what the fuck did they do that for? They ruined it. So, yeah, that didn't make my list because of that. As much as I love the first half, I just couldn't put it on my list. So there you go. That's my top 10 movies for 2025. Thank you so much for listening. And please join me again next time for another episode of The Song of Roland, a podcast about American culture. Go out and see these movies. I want to thank Stephen Gillis of Dzonk Books for sponsoring this podcast, and I want to thank Tiffany Hauk for her wonderful production skills, and I would like to thank my son Fletcher for his musical contributions. Join me again next time for another episode of The Song of Roland.